We did it, folks! We got through the 2010s and have entered a brand new decade in this series. It's the noughties, a decade defined by BlackBerry phones, auto-tuned pop music, and some of the worst pairs of jeans you have ever seen in your life. And what's our reward for venturing into the brave new era, or old era, I guess, of professional wrestling? Sloppy matches, infantile storylines, Raw guest hosts. The late noughties were a famously terrible time for WWE. Interest in wrestling was pretty low, as was the quality of what the company were putting out. John Cena dominated the main event scene to the great annoyance of many, and WWE felt more desperate than ever in reaching for that sweet mainstream attention. We had a hefty pile of plop to sift through for this particular list, but we have emerged from it with 10 of the absolute worst wrestling matches WWE put on all year. Nose pegs at the ready. Let's go. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst WWE matches of 2009. Join us. Number 10, Mickie James vs. Alicia Fox at Hell in a Cell. It's no secret that women's wrestling was not treated with a lot of respect in the noughties. Well, certainly not in WWE anyway, but shout out to Gail Kim and Awesome Kong for giving us hope during these dark times. In spite of this, the Big Dub still had some very talented women on its books in 2009. Beth Phoenix, Natalya, the aforementioned Gail Kim, and the one and only Mickie James. Unfortunately, not even a wrestler of Mickie's quality could drag a good match out of Alicia Northern Lights Suplex Fox at this stage in her career. The two fought for the Divas Championship at the 2009 Hell in a Cell pay-per-view in a match that was as clunky as it was boring. Fox looked totally out of place, unable to keep up with Mickie's offense and quickness in the ring. There were several awkward moments across this 5-minute match, which mercifully ended with James scoring the pin. Whilst far from the worst match ever, this encounter is the epitome of WWE's women's division at the time, one very talented wrestler being held back by a performer who just wasn't yet up to scratch. Number 9, Randy Orton vs. John Cena at Hell in a Cell. Sticking with Hell in a Cell now, and one of the three titular matches on the card that night. 2009 was most definitely the year of Orton vs. Cena. The ex-OVW colleagues competed against each other in 14 different televised matches across the year, 5 of which were on pay-per-view. Somewhere in the middle of those insane numbers was their meeting at Hell in a Cell, which was, well, in one word, dull. It was the longest match on the card at over 21 minutes, an accolade it did nothing to earn. Neither man had a particularly thrilling moveset at the time, throwing bland move after bland move at one another as the crowd slowly mossed over in their seats. At least there was some excitement in the form of a WWE Championship change, but that just meant that the rivalry had to continue. Fans were absolutely sick of these two fighting, and there were still 2 more months left in the year. As the previous match summed up WWE's women's division, this one perfectly encapsulated the men's, long, slow, uninspired, and populated by characters that desperately needed new creative direction. Number 8, Triple H vs. Randy Orton at WrestleMania 25. WrestleMania 25, insert joke about it not actually being the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania here, played host to what many consider as the best WWE match of all time. Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker blew the roof off the Reliant Stadium in Houston with 30 minutes of unbelievable wrestling. Then came the so-called main event, and oh boy did it fail to keep the momentum going. The Viper challenging the Game for the WWE title had some serious storyline weight behind it. Trips had invaded Randy's home not long before Mania as a response to Orton laying out the McMahon family, including giving the creepiest kiss of all time to Stephanie. Did this blood feud reflect in the actual match itself? Did it balls? It was hampered right from the start by a stipulation that meant that Triple H would lose the title if he got disqualified. Instead of being a furious battle between two angry titans, the match moved at a glacial pace with almost zero thrills. Wrong stip, wrong placement on the card, wrong night. A recipe for disaster. Number 7, Hornswoggle vs. Chavo Chavo Guerrero on Raw. To be honest, we could have chosen any of the cursed matches from the worst feud of the year between Chavo Guerrero and Hornswoggle. We're not quite sure how the feud started, and quite frankly, we don't care, because something this abhorrent is not worth wasting precious seconds of our time on Earth on. A boxing match, a Texas bull rope match, a blindfold match. Chavo and Swoggle competed in all of these stipulations and stank each and every one of them up. However, we have decided to go for the one that involves two adult men ripping the clothes off of one another. The pair met in a tuxedo match on the 20th July 2009 episode of Raw. Chavo could barely walk because someone had sewn his suit trouser legs together. Eddie Guerrero's nephew there, ladies and gentlemen. In the end, the former ECW Cruiserweight and Tag Team Champion lost to Swoggle and was sent running away in his underwear. This entire storyline, if you even want to call it that, was horrible from start to finish. Between this and Kerwin White, you can see why Chavo has never gone back to WWE since his release in 2011. Number 6, Santina Marella versus Beth Phoenix at Backlash. If you are not a fan of the words Santina Marella, then I offer you my sincerest apologies. You're going to be hearing quite a lot of them from this point on. We will get to her origin story in a bit, but all you need to know is that Santina was the sister of Santino Marella. Except she wasn't, obviously. She was just the Milan Miracle in drag. Bad drag at that. At Backlash 2009, Santina got herself into quite the pickle when the Great Khali announced his intentions to kiss her. After first claiming that she was in love with Jim Ross, which JR took about as well as you would expect, this segment was thankfully interrupted by Beth Phoenix. The Glamazon challenged Santina to a match, but was then bopped on the head by Khali for some reason. This intergender action led to more intergender action as Santina pinned a hapless Beth in 3 seconds to win. Whilst it might be funny to look back on now, and it's definitely not, Santina was totally unwatchable at the time. The fact that this segment dragged so many talented people and Khali into it, as well as taking valuable pay-per-view time away, makes it as rotten as Marella's wig. Number 5, Kane versus the Great Khali at Breaking Point. Another name we should have warned you about is the Great Khali, who will be reappearing on this list again very shortly. His summer feud with Kane was easily one of the worst of 2009, and it might have gotten the nod as the worst had Swoggle and Chavo not been stripping each other on live TV. The pair's second pay-per-view encounter that year took place at the ill-fated Breaking Point. It was a Singapore Kane match, which may well have been a tired pun on the Big Red Machine's name, not quite sure. As for the Singapore part, I genuinely believe that Vince McMahon may have thought Khali was from there. On paper, this sounds like two giant men whacking each other with sticks for 5 minutes. In reality, well, actually, that's exactly what happened. The pair spent most of the match playing piñata with each other until Kane hit an admittedly impressive chokeslam for the win. Working with Khali was a death sentence for many wrestlers, but smaller guys were able to get something out of him through the sheer mismatch of sizes. As nimble as Kane was for a big boy, there was nothing he could have done to get a better contest out of the Punjabi playboy. Honestly, he would have been better off wrestling one of the Kanes. Number 4, Kane versus the Great Khali at SummerSlam. Told you Khali would be back. Also, I refuse to call him the Great Khali anymore. I've just sat through these 2 matches. I can assure you there is nothing great about him. Before they were smacking each other with twigs, Kane and Khali had a straight-up singles match at the biggest party of the summer. The SummerSlam match had the same basic issues as the Breaking Point one. Khali's complete lack of mobility, Khali's lackluster offense, Khali's inability to convey emotion through his body or face. Basically everything Khali did was a giant waste of time. SummerSlam is ahead of Breaking Point here because the match was twice as long and there weren't any weapon spots to distract from the awful in-ring wrestling, if you can call it that. Khali had been on WWE's books for 3.5 years at this point, and they still hadn't really figured out a way to use him properly. He dragged everyone he ever got in the ring with down, and the Big Red Machine was no exception. I mean, Kane might be the devil's favorite demon, but feuding with Khali was the real hell. Number 3, CM Punk versus The Undertaker at Breaking Point. After The Undertaker spoiled CM Punk's World Heavyweight Championship win at the end of SummerSlam, the straight-edge superstar and the Deadman were booked to face each other for the title in a submission match at the aforementioned Breaking Point. 2 entries on one list. There's a reason WWE never did a Breaking Point show ever again, right? Not only was Punk fighting a much larger opponent, but Taker has famously never lost a match via submission in his entire career. And before you start, that doesn't mean that he had never tapped out, but that's a story for another time. So, how did WWE get around this? Well, this pay-per-view took place in Montreal, so why don't you have a guess? The Phenom thought that he had won the match via Hell's Gate, but Teddy Long then came out to remind us that the move was banned. Punk then slapped on the Anaconda Vice, and the bell rang immediately without Taker's hand moving a smidge. This rehashing of the screwjob achieved nothing because Taker just squashed Punk for the title a month later. It was a flat ending to an already terrible show and deprived fans of what could have been a belter of a match. WrestleMania 29, this was not. Number 2, Santina Marella versus Vicky Guerrero and Chavo Guerrero at Extreme Rules. After beating Beth Phoenix at Backlash, Santina Marella faced her toughest opponent yet at Extreme Rules. Untrained wrestler Vicky Guerrero in a hog pen match. And also Chavo was there. Christ 2009, what the hell was going on? For 2 minutes and 43 seconds, Santino in drag rolled around a pit of mud with 2 members of one of the greatest dynasties in all of wrestling. There is an absurdist joy to be taken from the sight of Vicky Guerrero in a yellow ball gown covered in mud, or Chavo sailing over a wooden fence into an arena full of real, quite terrified pigs, but at the end of the day, this was not a good match. Santina won, not that it matters, pinning Vicky after dumping a bucket full of muck on poor Chavo's head. Thankfully, this was the end of the Santina character as a regular fixture of WWE TV. She had her fun, but she was fired on screen by Donald Trump, as if this storyline couldn't get any weirder. It's quite poetic that the Santina character died as part of this entry, as for our number 1 spot, we are going back to where the gimmick began. Number 1, the Miss WrestleMania Battle Royal at WrestleMania 25. Forget what I said earlier about Mickie versus Alicia. This is the match that perfectly sums up how WWE felt about their women's division in 2009. What was meant to be a celebration of women's wrestling in WWE served as little more than a palate cleanser after a Kid Rock concert. 25 women from across various eras all competed in a battle royal to win the title of Miss WrestleMania. Huge names such as Victoria, Molly Holly, and Sunny all made their returns for this match. We thought we would tell you that, as WWE made absolutely no effort to tell us watching at home who was in the ring. No entrances, no announcements, just 11 minutes of the commentators going, "Oh, I didn't know she was in this thing." And then to top it all off, this celebration of women's wrestling was won by the debuting Santina Marella, a man. From the total lack of interest WWE showed in promoting this match to its sloppy execution to the farcical winner, the Women's WrestleMania Battle Royal isn't even ironically good. It is a car crash from top to bottom, and an insulting one at that.